This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com.
Welcome back to the Green Rush. This is live. This is the Business of Cannabis podcast. Green Rush, 2-hour weekly live cannabis business talk show produced by Pro Cannabis Media every Friday from 4 to 6 Eastern. We discuss news, issues in the cannabis market each week, conducting a deeper dive into specific topics of the industry. This week, we are going to dive into everything that is psilocybin. That's the hallucinogenic compound derived from magic mushrooms. We're going to talk about psilocybin, plant medicine developments, and does that take away from the cannabis movement? We're going to talk about all of that with some guests coming up. But this first segment, we've got Jimmy. Jimmy's going to be on board with Riley Cote. He is.
I hope it's Riley Cote.
Is it Cote?
It's I think it is.
Is it pronounced Cote?
Yeah,
not bad. I thought it was Cote.
He's been on with Dave Briggs before, so I'm going to go on. And by the way, Josh, that was a great intro. But tell the people who you are.
I'm Josh Kincaid. I'm a capital markets analyst, but today I'm going to be the host. I've got a podcast called The Talking Hedge. It's a cannabis business podcast, and in my day job, I talk about the markets and finance and everything that is cannabis.
There you go. But I see that Riley Cote is in the waiting room. I think he can hear us. Maybe he'll give us he just disappeared.
I think he's trying to get his volume all set up.
Yeah. But, John, this is great. I just want to thank you for jumping in here and stepping into the host chair. And if you like it, we'll talk later. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no worries.
All right. There's a big boomer happening outside my window here outside of Massachusetts. Riley, are you there?
I'm here now.
There you go. So
I apologize.
Don't apologize. I just want to introduce myself. I'm Jimmy Young. I'm the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. And this is the second time. I don't know if you know this. I'm pretty sure it's the second time you've been on our network because Dave Briggs interviewed you once. Do you remember Dave Briggs?
Absolutely. Yeah.
In the conversation. And now you're going to have Josh Kincaid. So I'm going to go into the chat room and everybody can tell me what a goofball I am. And you two can chit chat about the news of the day and what Riley's up to. Okay.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Jimmy.
All right.
Nice to see you, Jimmy.
Nice to meet you.
Riley, is it true your last name is pronounced Cote and not Cote?
Yeah, it's Cote. It's actually a French name. I just failed to put the accents on there to make it easier for people to read.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So you're co-founder of Wake. That's a fungi innovation for human wellness. And you're also a retired NHL player for Philadelphia Flyers.
Right. I'm actually not a co-founder of Wake. I'm an investor in the company. But trivialities. But yes to the former Philadelphia Flyer.
So you've been on the speaking circuit for a while. You talked about THC and CBD for CTE. Isn't that right? With your time in the NHL playing for the Flyers?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's how I got into all this stuff. Really was around TBI, concussions. I was a fighter in hockey, so dealt with a lot of that.
So you've talked about cannabis and using it for those therapeutic purposes, but what about psilocybin? Let's talk about magic mushrooms. When did you first take those and why are you taking them now?
Well, the first time I ever took mushrooms was back in my teenage years, right? I'm 16 years old, recreational settings, no understanding of it. It wasn't until I retired in 2010, the age of 28, that I started using both cannabis, psilocybin mindfully with an intention, right? I was trying to actually accomplish something where I actually knew what I was trying to accomplish. So it was around TBI, again, being punched in the face several thousand times, over 200 hockey fights, read a couple books, one Hemp for Health, that kind of opened up my understanding around the different cannabinoids and some of their anti-inflammatory properties, neurogenesis properties. And then that just led me down to the next thing, which was understanding psilocybin mushrooms and their therapeutic value, as well as what they do around the brain, right? Their impact on the brain regeneration and neurogenesis. So naturally, I started using these with intent and approaching it as medicine. It was, I've been using cannabis and psilocybin for years, just never had a full understanding of what they were actually doing to me and my brain, and then started using them mindfully. And then it's been an amazing journey ever since, really.
So with psilocybin, though, it's very similar path to cannabis. It's a Schedule 1 narcotic by the DEA, but it's also growing, right? There's a lot of research suggesting that it can be used for addiction and depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And in the early days of any industry like this one, we're seeing that nonprofits, there's scrappy startups, they're making up the psychedelic space. And now companies are raising millions from investors going into public exchanges. You started your own business, or at least you're an advisor. So what is Wake all about, and what do we need to know about the booming psychedelic industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like cannabis, you got the real players, and you got you're always gonna have phonies coming out of the woodworks to participate because it's a sexy thing to do. Wake is right now a psilocybin mushroom and tech company. We're looking to work in different psychedelics like ibogaine, MDMA, and ketamine down the road. But right now, psilocybin mushroom cultivation in Jamaica, retreats, registered microdose drug through the Department of Health in Jamaica, phase 2 clinical trials on the microdose drug. Have imported psilocybin mushrooms 5 separate times into the U.S. through the DEA, fully extracted psilocybin, full spectrum oil through the DEA registered lab. So a legitimate psychedelic company, partnership with the Lieber Institute, which has the largest database of genetically profiled brains. So really kind of reverse engineering a lot of this mental health, brain degeneration issues that people deal with, and seeing if psilocybin is a good fit and how it may interact with certain genetic profiles. So a lot of amazing stuff happening, and happy to be a part of it. I almost got stuck in Jamaica before COVID. As COVID hit and they started locking down the borders for international travel, I almost got stuck down there as I had participated in the first retreat down there. And I just love what they were doing, not just around mushrooms, because I obviously believed in that, but the tech, the research component, the data collection, as we all need to see the numbers and to validate what we're actually experiencing here. So amazing stuff, honestly.
Why Jamaica? I mean, we see Colombia and they have great terroir. They have experience with coffee and agriculture. They have cheap labor costs. And so all of that makes sense from a commodity standpoint. What is it about Jamaica that's drawing the psilocybin or psychedelic industry to that tiny island?
It's just the laws, right? It's legal and unregulated. So we're trying to build out the footprint here and do as much as we can legally through with the government, just through the proper channels, and then building the infrastructure. And then when different countries go online, different states go online, just kind of transplant the infrastructure there. And so that's really it. I mean, we're working on bringing ibogaine there. It's legal, unregulated. So that's why psychedelic companies are going to Jamaica, right? It's just you just kind of do it where you can, and start building out the footprint. And then as states turn online, then you kind of move the ship there and do what you're doing in Jamaica there.
I'm curious if we're going to see kind of a parallel existence with cannabis and synthetics, think of D8, for example, and you have all these people going in and growing in places that they shouldn't be, like Florida, for example. When there is open borders and global legalization, those places won't be a place to cultivate cannabis, for example. And maybe Jamaica won't be a place to cultivate mushrooms. I don't know. But what I do know is that there will be people that look for synthetic wherever they can because of the cost behind it. It's cheaper. And a lot of psilocybin that's using in clinical trials today is synthesized in laboratories without the use of biological materials. So as the psychedelic assisted therapy gains momentum, and you have consumers, investors needing to understand that difference between current available means of obtaining psilocybin, how's that going to work out? Are we going to see psilocybin produced naturally, organically, or is the synthetic going to take over? Do you have a personal or professional opinion about that?
Well, I have an opinion on it. I think you're going to see a space where both are able to play. What you're seeing in Oregon right now, they've actually only allowed the path for natural psilocybin. Whether that lasts or not is to be determined, but the fact that they rolled out regulations that are fully supporting natural grown organic psilocybin is pretty amazing, honestly. Like you mentioned, I think all the clinical trials, all the stuff they're doing on a Johns Hopkins is all synthetic. And you're always going to have this debate, right? As you see this in cannabis, where you got like the whole list fully supporting, the full plants, right? It's like full spectrum. We want all the cannabinoids, we want all the terpenes, and you're seeing the same thing here with psilocybin. You got people that obviously believe in the intelligence of the mushroom, right? The mycelial network is something pretty profound when you talk about the intelligence of this. And then you go to a single molecule compound drug, right? And it's synthesized, obviously. I think the market, obviously, just like cannabis, into the psilocybin play is choosing the natural, right? I mean, the biggest test case here is probably microdosing right now, but they're not microdosing synthetic psilocybin. I think there's a renaissance going on. I think there's an increase in consciousness happening that that people are going back to nature for their healing, right? I think we've honestly been fundamentally misled with a lot of different drug developments and applications over the years, and you've seen us be enslaved by the opioid crisis, and how, as highly intelligent people, can we have allowed that to happen? How could we have hit the bullseye on the wrong target? So I personally just think there's always going to be a movement around the naturally occurring or naturally derived psilocybin mushrooms, because that is as ancient as it gets, and that's how humans have evolved. And I think we're reconnecting back to nature. But there is always going to be that pharma play. Absolutely, there's billions of dollars already thrown in that drug development. One disease, one molecule type of play. But what I really believe is the core of this issue around mental health is that these aren't really medical issues we're dealing with, right? Yeah, it creates imbalances in the brain chemistry. These are spiritual issues, and this is spiritual medicine. And I think once we start reconnecting back to source energy and reconnecting back to nature and this element of oneness, and living more through the heart and less in the mind, like all these spiritual things, like we can sever a lot of these disease states, these medical labels. Because in my opinion, we're essentially spiritually bankrupt. This is exactly what we're dealing with here, right? We're at like a precipice of time where the human condition is lost. Like we've just lost our way, and then here we are, in this psychedelic renaissance and this opportunity to help reconnect humans back to their divine spirit. And that, to me, that's what it is. That's why this is so sacred. That's why indigenous tribes have been holding on to these medicines for eons, right? And then here we come, like, oh yeah, we're gonna patent the shit out of everything, and we're gonna try and control the market and all that. And you've seen that with cannabis, right? I mean, like CBD, it's like probably the safest molecule. Again, the debate of molecule versus full spectrum, that's for another day. But like, the FDA just can't find a stance on it. It can't actually make a legitimate, pathway for whether food and beverage to play in this, right? Because it's just, the science is so political. It's so misleading. And I would like to be honest around this conversation, honestly, because it's just too much bullshit in the science of, right? It's just so many people just lobbying for position, and their stance is generally not really backed by science. It's backed by money, and that's the world we live in. I mean, unfortunately.
There was also a lot of philanthropic folks in the industry that jumped ship from cannabis to the psychedelic industry, and I'm wondering if those folks are just there as carpetbaggers wanting to make money or get highs that like the effects. Does it matter that they're not philanthropic, or does it matter that they're not in it for the spirituality? Is it taking away from that industry having a bunch of folks jumping in? Does it matter either way?
I mean, I think it matters, of course, right? I mean, I think you'd always want people to do things for the right reasons. Unfortunately, we don't live in a world that people generally do things for the right reasons, right? It's usually selfishness, not selflessness, right? And a lot of people claim they're doing it for, the good of, the good of the gander, and they're doing this for the movement and all that stuff. But, again, you're always going to see this. Just people see an opportunity, and there's a sexiness and a uniqueness around it, and they just want to, hop into it just because. And, again, whether it's satisfying to the ego or they really think that they're going to make $1 billion overnight, whatever the case may be. I mean, you've probably seen a lot of people's egos being checked in cannabis that thought they were going to hop in, and it's going to be just like this, this golden goose that's just going to pump out money. I think a lot of people probably made money, but I think probably more people lost money in cannabis, as it stands right now. And I think if your heart's not in it the right way, and if you're not genuine with your approach to it, I think this, again, cannabis is spiritual too, right? There's a level of consciousness that comes along with that, and I think if you go in it with the wrong intentions, I think the universe finds a way to wean out the people that have a dark stain on it. So there's always going to be these people, right? And you can always see these shitty companies coming up and claiming to save the world, but you look at the people behind them a lot of the times, and they're soulless. They're just there to exploit and take advantage of something sacred.
What makes Wake unique in that fact?
Well, we're growing organically, growing mushrooms with substrates like bamboo and lemongrass. Not that it's about the substrate, but it's clean. It's a very clean grow. The technology component, the headgear, the data collection, the research component. I think everyone's claims to be doing that, but we're legitimately doing it, and we're showing it. We've recently filmed a E60 documentary with ESPN that's going to be airing in October. That's going to show the world like legitimately what we're doing, and it's for real. And I think everyone talks about integration, but there's a huge focus on integration. Like, to me, like, the integration is the lifestyle that needs to be taught. And the psychedelics really need to support it, right? It needs a catalyst to help jumpstart people's spiritual path. Like, again, going back to my point, like, we're spiritually disconnected, and we need something to just like light a fire, create some sort of like little ripple awakening to help change the pathway moving forward. This is a lifestyle, right? So heavy on the integration, even right? I mean, this needs to start before you actually ingest a psychedelic. It's not just like come in for your treatment and then see you later, like this, like it's going to magically change all your whole life and fix all your problems, right? At the end of the day, we need to do the work. We are the medicine. Just Mother Nature has blessed us with some pretty profound compounds that can help be the catalyst to make change. And then outside of that, we're working on closing a deal with a series of clinics in the US too. So in the ketamine space, that's going to again start building out our footprint here, and really just doing what we can legitimately and professionally, and not turning our backs on the true indigenous ways, right? I mean, there's this melding of like indigenous and Western practices of philosophy's approach to holding space and ceremony. And I've participated in several indigenous ceremonies, and I've seen some of the Western clinical models, and it's they're almost polar opposites. But I think there needs to be a dance between the two, because this is sacred medicine, but we do need to understand that we're obviously dealing with Westerners, the Western world and the industrialized world, and things have changed, and and playing that game too. So.
Well, with that, I think we have to take a break. It's 4:20 somewhere, but if somebody wants to follow up with you, whether it's cannabis, ketamine, or the psilocybin psychedelic industry, where can they get a hold of you at? Where are you at?
Well, RileyCote.com, or you can just email me at Riley@RileyCote.com, and then we could chat and figure it out.
Easy enough. And then you're still advisor with Wake. People want to check out Wake. Where are they at?
Yeah, wake.net. And then again, you could reach out to me at rileycote.com, or Nick at wake.net. But wake.net is a pretty good resource to understand what we're up to and go from there.
Okay. Well, stay tuned, everybody. We got a great panel coming up. We got to take a quick break for 420, but Riley Cote, appreciate you being on, and we're going to have you back on for sure. But thanks again, and make sure you have a great weekend. But everybody else, come right back. We'll be right back.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information. This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com. Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The Armoire at greengoddesssupply.com.
Welcome back to the Green Rush, the business of cannabis. I'm your host, Josh Kincaid with the Talking Hedge Cannabis Business Podcast. We're on part two. We've got a great panel. We've got Sarah Chase, Executive Director for the Council of Federal Cannabis Regulation, and Michael Mays, CEO of Quantum 9. Panelists, thanks for being with us at Green Rush.
Thank you, Josh. It's great to be here. Hi, Michael.
How's it going, Sarah? It's nice to be included as well.
Yeah, appreciate you guys being here. Just jumping right in, I want to talk about, I think this one's going to be for Sarah, being regulations, and talk about social equity and how it relates, I guess, to the cannabis industry. We're seeing that psychedelics still illegal under the U.S. federal law, and keeping in with the long-time U.S. war on drugs. But we're seeing venture capitalists and investors, Silicon Valley tech bros, big pharma, all these players currently racing to pound down the doors of the perception into the realm of decriminalize the psychedelic industry.
Yep.
And we're seeing a lot of capital coming through, bringing that to a reality. But will the psychedelic industry follow the cannabis industry in trying to prioritize a social equity program for those most affected by the war on drugs, or will that not apply to psychedelics?
That's a very good question. Yeah, I think you're hitting the nail on the head here, because cannabis historically has a stigma with Black and brown people, and you have a very long history with the war on drugs. And it's created an environment where social equity and decriminalization and legalization of cannabis sort of do walk hand in hand. That's not quite the same with the psychedelic industry. Yes, there's a stigma around it, but I hate to use this term. It's sort of been the white person's drug of choice for a long time. So you don't have the same rates of incarceration. You don't have the same level of inequity that's been brought about because of this, and you don't necessarily have the same kind of legacy markets that grew up around this industry, because it's primarily a synthesized or a chemical version outside of the worlds of fungus and mushroom too. So you have something that's more of a lab synthetic as opposed to sort of a plant that's been grown for thousands of years. So I don't think you're going to see the same approach to it that cannabis has had to take with social equity, just because of the history around it. It's that much more of a departure away. There is still going to be a stretch in terms of public understanding around destigmatizing this, though, and how are we going to approach the research around it? What needs to be done in terms of federal policy in order to make this a safe and efficacious approach to public health. I think that's probably going to be more of the push in terms of letting the research lead on this first and foremost, before the conversation about any kind of decriminalization comes in.
Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think that, you mentioned that a lot of Silicon Valley money is pouring into the industry. And I think that much of that's fueled behind the FDA approach. Getting these substances through clinical trials, actually determining what therapies and what ailments that they're going to address, and then going through the actual product life cycle of that. So I think that the parallels in cannabis, although from a regulation standpoint, how it's secured, how it's transported, how licensing is done, so many parallels on that level. But I think with taking more of a clinical therapies approach with psilocybin, with psychedelics in general, I think that will be the backbone of the industry.
Yeah, and I would like to build on that too, because that's a good point, Michael. The industry around psilocybin and psychedelics has more of a pharmaceutical approach and mindset to begin with, and I think that it will probably be slightly easier for them to tackle the tremendous effort needed to do clinical trial research, to the point that it's more more appropriate for the federal agencies to understand, and that will just sort of spur regulation a little bit faster, and probably legalization.
Yeah, on average, it's $500 million venture to get a product through clinical trials. I don't think a lot of people understand the lengths that you have to go to get there, but it is incredibly costly, and especially if you don't have government money coming into it, and private equity is one of your main solutions.
Right.
And money is really what's kind of making the world go round. A lot of people in cannabis has forgotten about Charlotte's Web and how the visual of seeing the girl Charlotte stopping with her seizures was one aspect, but really when the money came through, that's when everybody forgot about the girl and just realized that there was a lot of cash to be made, and they kind of forget about Charlotte. In the psychedelic industry, there's 1.8 billion that was raised from startups and public companies and private investors in 2021, and that was to fund research into the psychedelics. But those businesses still have to demonstrate that they have a viable business model. So experts fear that psychedelics will fall exclusively into the hands of big pharma, and the industry will follow the same path as cannabis, which is making the rich get richer. Will magic mushrooms give investors an experience of a lifetime, or just a bad trip? Michael?
Well, being a psilocybin investor myself, I've already started to look at publicly traded companies. Last year, the volatility was intense. I mean, you have companies like Compass, MindMend, Atai. These companies are amazing futures, but making that revenue model move faster is, kind of where the precipice is of, having a viable company and a viable product, and where that meets. And I think that the long-term strategy is intellectual property. Like, how do you position to get an FDA product approved, and then that being the go-to therapy when other therapies don't work? So treatment-resistant patients that have tried other means and just can't get over that hump. There just needs to be, a few Charlottes of the world, whether it's psilocybin as a therapy, or one of the other known psychedelic therapies. But I think that that's the exciting part. Is it only takes that one great story to really change perception of this drug.
Can I ask a follow-up question for you, Michael? Does the psychedelics industry, do they have the same difficulty that the cannabis industry has in terms of safe banking? Is that
so? Yeah. That's a great question. And if you look at where psilocybin is in the United States in general, federally it's still Schedule I narcotic. But like cannabis, there's states like Oregon that are just scratching the surface on state-run facilities, which it'll be more of a therapeutic experience where a licensed facilitator will consult with patients in a certain environment, using psilocybin as a therapy, and they just published the first round of rules. So, they'll be accepting applications in 2023, and is primarily where Quantum 9 focuses, is the licensing, and then, helping with the business planning, and then through that, then if there's any M&A activity there thereafter. But really, that's, the big scope of it.
Are they having issues getting their accounts shut down, like bank accounts?
Yeah, so there aren't a ton of companies that are doing this yet in the United States, other than the ones that there's Canadian companies that are doing it, but it is a Schedule 1 narcotic, and they will face the almost identical banking issues. So where cannabis, avoided FDI insured banks, the only avenue there are local credit unions. So I think that's going to be the tough part. But again, it was the bank's due diligence on finding out what these companies did, and if your focus and your website is more on the clinical trial end, it's going to be a lot harder for a psilocybin company that's creating a therapeutic product to lose their bank account. It's not unheard of, but it's less likely than a bank account that says pot shop kind of LLC.
And is the process with the DEA the same in terms of getting a license to utilize the product?
So in Oregon, they're not requiring DEA, a special license to do that. It's actually state run. So much like cannabis, where there's this disconnect between federal legalization and state legalization, you're starting to butt into that industry. So where this illicit market, which has been thriving over the last 2 years, is really starting to move into a more regulated market. So out of the black into the gray, just like cannabis. And soon, you're going to see, sweeping changes. We're one of 50 currently. So if you look at it from that standpoint, we're right at the precipice of the industry where, much like cannabis, it's the slate's blank. Insurance, banking, these things, we haven't even started brushing the surface on it. Once Oregon starts licensing these facilities, and there could be complaints and so forth, that's when the stories start to happen, and you start to lose bank accounts and these things for mainly irresponsible operators. But I think that the way that this is being set up in Oregon, it's going to be the opposite. They're taking every opportunity to make this a clinical product, and the backgrounds of the facilitators, the way these sites are set up, it's going to be a lot different.
Speaking of licenses, Kaya Holdings, they're seeking a license for the first ever state legal psilocybin manufacturing and facilitation service center in Oregon. What do you think is going to be the potential price tag by comparison to cannabis counterparts? We've seen limited licenses in like Arizona go for $20 million per location. What do you think is going to be the financial price tag of a license in the psychedelic industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends on the model, right? Some of these companies that if it was license only, the way they're getting those huge, 10, 20, 30, $60 million price tags is the scarcity of licenses. So in a state like Oregon, where there is no cap on the number of licenses, that's where the valuations start to drop a little bit. Then what's the other end of it? If it's not just the license, it's the other side of it, which is the revenue generation or the intellectual property that's created. So an FDA approved product versus a product that's, state-based, that hasn't gone through all clinical trials, what has stronger IP? Obviously, long-term, the FDA approved product could, but in the short term, branded products seem to have a higher revenue stream immediately. So I guess that is the question. For me, I believe that it could be worth, day one license could be worth anywhere from 1 to 10 million, depending on, what license types that you have, and if you are vertically integrated with all of the different types.
And are social equity are considerations in part of the licensing for this market too, or no?
So, social equity is tough, right? Because, at what time have things become legal is the real focus. And, how do we affect those that have been negatively affected or disproportionately affected by the drug, the war on drugs? So where you don't have, like you were saying earlier, we don't have an overwhelming number of people that are incarcerated for psilocybin, what is the actual impact of providing social justice? There will more likely be regulations that allow those that have minor possessions in the future, have those in a more recreational setting. Although, there's aspects of this in this industry already, is it going to be a huge focus? maybe, but more likely less than you would think.
Sarah, I got a question for you about the regulation. I'm in Seattle. So Washington psilocybin bill would legalize supported adult use. The passage of the act would enable the Washington Department of Health to issue licenses to psilocybin manufacturing facilities, testing labs, service centers, and facilitators, and create the Washington Psilocybin Advisory Board to advise the department in creating rules for the act's implementation. There's a growing number of states that are considering bills to expand research and access to psilocybin. How could magic mushrooms follow in the footsteps of cannabis regulation, Sarah?
Well, I think we'd have to think about everything from age limits to packaging and labeling, and to sort of go down each of those pathways. And then you would be looking about, what about infusions into food and beverage? What would be the restrictions there? Sort of like guiding the regulators on what are the unintended consequences and how can we address them preemptively. And I think that's what is informative about the cannabis industry, is all the questions that have to be asked around these products. And again, also impaired driving, public service campaigns about appropriate dosing. What is, my understanding of the psychedelic market too is a lot of the, if you're not talking about microdosing, if you're having a trip or you're going through a guided meditation that's meant and intended to be therapeutic in its value, oftentimes that requires a guide or somebody who can kind of walk you through the experience. So I think, looking at this from both the public health and safety realm, as to, you don't want bad products proliferating on the market, how can you regulate that? All the way up to, what is the intended medicinal purpose of this, and how can you regulate appropriately for people who are seeking this, both for medicine or for therapy.
It seems like they're going to be doing similar, kind of following the footsteps of cannabis with the distance from churches and schools and things of that nature. Michael, you kind of seeing the layout being basically just carbon copied from cannabis into the psychedelic world?
Yeah, I mean, before cannabis was, all of the regulations for cannabis borrowed a lot of regulations from the security industry for casinos. So, like, you saw this in Colorado when they were at the forefront of the industry. Where else can we borrow regulations from? Who wants to start from scratch? Nobody. So, yes, there's going to be tons of overlap with how things, seed to sale tracking, inventory tracking, security, transport, environment. Those are all so very common, and Oregon's taking a lot of things from cannabis. But why not? This is the model is already set up for something in which there are public health issue concerns with adverse events. In the psilocybin industry, there's a term called set and setting. Your mindset going into an event, a therapy, and then the setting that you're doing it in. So where Sarah was mentioning, a shaman or a guided meditation individual, like that, I think is what is now required and will be the standard on how these medicines are delivered. But, that framework is, really starting, I believe, in Oregon currently, which will then set the stage for Washington, probably Colorado. I've seen some stuff in Missouri, Connecticut. Like, they're all following similar paths. But, the facilitator model that has a certain background experience, I think is one that will stick.
Michael, have you heard the term psychopharmacology too, with people who are sort of combining? It's sort of a burgeoning field for pharmacists to get into, where they start to prescribe, what would be THC or psilocybin or anything that's along the line of a psychoactive. And I'm wondering, do you see a world? I'll give you two scenarios, and this is just a hypothetical. Like, one world where you would go to CVS and you would have both your regular pharmacist and your psychopharmacologist, who you could ask questions about. Well, what should I be taking for a microdose? What should I have X percentage of THC and CBD for whatever? Or do you see more of a world where you have dispensaries with people who are trained to a certain degree in pharmacology, but it's not necessarily a medical requirement?
Yeah, that's a great question. And pieces of that already exist, believe it or not. They're compound pharmacists. Before, you're seeing trials now with ketamine. Prior, they were already using it in some settings. So I don't think that it's going to be a la carte type of menu, like, hey, I as a compound pharmacist say, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I think it'll be more so there needs to be a clinician that is involved from start to finish so that the adverse event cycle doesn't start. And if it does, having a nurse or somebody on site that can help that individual come out of their adverse event and into an environment where they feel safe again. Because at the end of the day, panic attacks, adverse events like that, high blood pressure, these things are not uncommon in the illicit market. So you can only imagine that in a regulated market, this could be something that may be of an issue. But again, it depends on the patient. What experience are they trying to derive? What therapy are they trying to get to? Is it like a microdose scenario, or are they really trying to break through? And that breakthrough is sometimes, it's a journey to get there.
I saw an article that said the DEA backs down and will not criminalize 5 psychedelics. So that's kind of where we're at. And where it started was a 2004 pilot study from the University of California in LA exploring the potential of psilocybin treatment in patients with advanced stage cancer, managed to reignite interest and specifically renew efforts in psilocybin research, heralding a new age and exploration for psychedelic therapy. You have universities that want the neuropharmaceutical market, and Wall Street wants it. But how much of the influence does Wall Street's capital have and lobbying on the industry, as you're seeing biotech firms funded by venture capital, buoyed by promise research to treat a variety of mental health issues? And is that a good thing? Sarah?
That's a complicated question. I would think that overall, the creation of a new marketplace like this is a genuinely good thing, and I think driven by an intention to do quite a bit of good for people who are suffering from anxiety, PTSD, any type of psychological issue that could be solved through new and alternative therapies. And that can go along with cognitive behavioral therapy, yoga, all sorts of things kind of combined. So I think the shift in the marketplace is clear to me. And it is one of those situations where entrepreneurs and investors will kind of lead the charge. Wall Street will follow, and then it will be a slow pace, but you will see the regulators and the administrations begin to follow, sort of follow the money as it can be proved. And I think a lot of this is going to fall to the research side of this to make sure that safety, efficacy is proved, and that the research is good. We say it at CFCR that good science leads to good policy. And I think if you really are following the science on this, and you see what the potential is, and what the opportunities are, then you've got a win-win situation for both helping with mental health crisis, helping people through very serious psychological impairment, and helping them kind of lead better, more productive lives. That in turn will inform how we regulate around this, to inform good policy.
Michael, do you think that there's a chance that this industry could go Schedule II? The cannabis industry is really worried about pharmaceutical industry, big pharma getting 100% control of cannabis. Is it more likely that could happen with the psychedelic industry?
So, you use the term big pharma a few times, and I'm wondering if, what your definition of that, do you consider like a Compass or a MindMed? Do you consider that big pharma, or are you talking about like the DuPonts of the world? Where in that do you consider that? I guess is my first question.
Yeah, and Josh, I'd add to that. I mean, I think a concern with the cannabis industry, even before you get to the big pharma, is the MSOs too. There's sort of like a whole bunch of tiers here that we have to work through.
Yeah, like I'll let you answer that question, and
Yeah, and I think I can answer both of those. I would consider MSOs and MindMed is like this middle stage, and so you have big pharma as like the top capital, and you have these players who want to become big pharma, and they've completely built out their entire advisory board to be like Tilray, for example. They want to be bought by big alcohol, big tobacco, big timber. They don't care. They want to be bought by somebody large, and that's why they're just a mediocre company. So when you look at big pharma, I'm talking about the big DuPonts of the world, Pfizer.
Yeah. So I feel like the cannabis industry has got a taste of that. And as a result, it's shifted a little bit. So if you look at canopy growth and how Constellation, big liquor, started to make big moves in there, and they really got bit hard from it. So do I think big tobacco, big liquor, will that be the consumer of all of these types of companies? Probably not. I think these MSOs are really going to be the ones that are gobbling up all these companies because they already have the model. They already know what they're doing. So for a larger company to come in and, take over everything, it's probably less likely than a middle-sized player becoming a large player and then becoming an even larger player. So now you have these giant MSOs that are merging and being, a larger conglomerate. So I think that the big pharma play is probably going to be more towards the FDA clinical proven through clinical trials companies, whereas your Oregon-based companies that are at the front lines with treating patients with facilitators, I think that in its own ecosystem will grow like the MSOs did in cannabis.
Yeah, and I'd add to that too that I think going back to this sort of psychopharmacology, I think you may see some very unique, very large companies that become the size of big pharma, big tobacco, and alcohol that just grow out of this new industry too. So that you're actually going to have what is big psychopharma companies essentially that will grow out of it. You'll have a whole new division here that we can worry about.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about the companies that are practicing in this space already, I mean, they're not just limiting it to psilocybin, MDMA, LSD. I mean, all of these are, going through clinical trials now, and it's an exciting time because, before LSD was, criminalized and, it was a therapy for many people. And the experiences people were having, the breakthroughs that people were having, it was just, for lack of a better word, incredible. So I think that we can probably get there again. It's just that, how do we change public perception in a positive way while allowing these therapies to mature in a responsible setting with responsible operators?
We all need to figure out who Michael Pollan's investing in.
Peter Thiel invested in, I believe it was a tie. So if you follow that money, I think it was
Speaking
a couple of years ago.
Money, I'm curious about lobbyists that don't want this to happen. So with cannabis, you could look at the timber industry not wanting to compete against hemp. You can look at big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma as kind of not wanting to compete against cannabis. With the psychedelic industry, what's the equivalent? Is coffee lobbying against it because people can microdose and not drink coffee anymore? I mean, who is against psilocybin at this point?
I mean, I'll throw my 2 cents in there. It'll be the direct competitors of the products that aren't working for them. So for instance, depression, anxiety, PTSD issues, those types of mental health industries where the patients are treatment resistant. So instead of going to try these methods and then go to the last ditch effort, that may be a first ditch effort. And if that workflow happens, then those are the companies that'll be most effective. I'm not going to throw any names out there, but we can all make a guess on that.
Yeah, and I think you don't want the pharmaceutical companies, they don't necessarily want to shoot themselves in the foot either. So there's the potential that they may gobble up a lot of these companies and then just shut them down too, because they've already prioritized and spent billions of dollars on their other drugs. And I think that's a valid concern, both for this industry and for the cannabis industry. Is, there's already billions of dollars being spent on the market on these other drugs, and how do we keep this from becoming the next number one?
Yeah, Sarah, I would agree with you, but there's a certain point where I believe that I'm just going to speak out a little bit with the types of companies that I mentioned. I don't know if they would allow that to happen. So in this industry, what's more important, helping people or money? And I feel like the people at the helms of those ships wouldn't sell out. And I hope I'm right, but the feeling is different in this industry, I believe, than before.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't think people were gonna say no to money, but that's my personal opinion. I guess we're gonna have to wait and find out. Where can people find you at? Michael, where are you at? Where can if people want to get more information about you or Quantum 9, where are you at?
Yeah, quantum9.net is our website. We work in the psilocybin and cannabis space. We've done incredible work in the cannabis licensing space and regulatory spaces already, helping regulators understand cannabis and such. So quantum9.net, and I'm located here in Chicago.
Perfect. And then Sarah Chase, you're the executive director for the Council of Federal Cannabis Regulation. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to talk to you some more?
Yeah, you can email me. It's Sarah with an H at uscfcr.org. You can also go on our website, which is www.uscfcr.org. And you can find us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, but reach out and email me. Happy to talk to anybody at any time.
Awesome. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to come back with another panel. But with that, I want to thank Michael and Sarah. Both of you guys were awesome. Appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great weekend.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems. Whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that it will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
You want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
Welcome back to the Green Rush, the business of cannabis. We're going to be talking about everything that is magic mushrooms today. With me to help me do that, Dr. Michele Ross. She's the founder of Infused Health, and Shango, the founder and host of Shaping Fire. Thanks, y'all, for being with me on this Friday afternoon. How are you?
Good. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, anytime. So jumping right in, Shango, this one's for you, and then Dr. Michele Ross will give her 2 cents after that. I want to jump in with something fun. Celebrities. Celebrity cannabis hasn't done well at all. Let's talk about celebrities in the psychedelic industry, including actors like Megan Fox, Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith, and talk show host Chelsea Handler. They've all testified to the psychedelically transformative powers of a psychedelic trip. Will those profiting maintain the counterculture ideals of the people who popularized it?
Oh, wow. That is starting out the big. Well, first of all, I'll say right off the top, I'm not a big fan of celebrity involvement with health at all. And I haven't liked what I've seen from celebrities starting cannabis companies. They don't necessarily seem to have the same values of the culture originally. And I suspect that same thing could happen with mushrooms as well, where suddenly the celebrity becomes more important with the application of the medicine. That said, there are definitely certain parts of the American public that you can only reach with those kind of folks. And so for many people, hearing somebody with long hair or a beard talk about psychedelics, they may put it like simply in a hippie category. But if they see an NFL player when they're watching the games every weekend talk about their concussions and how using microdosing eases the impacts, no pun intended, of their injuries, suddenly their ears are open. So I think that it is very important where we rely on them, not necessarily for building the brand for the companies, but more for focused outreach.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ross, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have to agree a lot with what Shango already has said. But, I think when we have these celebrities that are saying things like psychedelics have made such a big impact in their life, and then of course we see them do blunders in public, such as Will Smith punching, Chris Rock, and of course saying he had done all these ayahuasca trips and worked on his ego, and then did something as silly as that on TV. That's not helping the psychedelic industry. That's not helping build any brands. No one can say, hey, after that, let's, advertise an ayahuasca retreat or, use any of that, right? So I think that we really should let celebrities say their stories, but let's not build, on the backs of celebrities. I really think that we should build on the science, and again, keep the celebrities out of it. We haven't really seen a lot of success with celebrity brands in cannabis, and I don't think we're going to see a lot of success with celebrity brands in psychedelics, with the exception again of very, very passionate people. Like again, you had, I think, Riley Cote on your show a little earlier. He is someone who I really, really do respect, who has had a very significant experience with psychedelics and a traumatic brain injury. Very different, but he is both an entrepreneur and somebody in the space, not just somebody who ran off with a shaman and then did 100 interviews or something like that. So I think it's really important that we separate the sensationalism, the PR buzz, versus somebody who is actually building real businesses in this space.
My understanding is there's not the focus on addiction. You have researchers at the New York University, Johns Hopkins, they're creating research and training programs to focus on that therapeutic use, and just more attention on mental health. I personally don't think it's an attention on mental health. I think it's an attention on the money that is backed by mental health. That's just, I don't think the government cares about your health or mine. That's just me personally. But so we have to take that into our own hands, our health into our own hands. What are the benefits, Shango, and risks for using mushrooms?
Well, I mean, that could be an entire show in and of itself,
Yeah.
right? But to quickly summarize, what we're seeing mostly from people using mushrooms for health reasons, number one, by far the most common, is by microdosing. Small amounts of psilocin in the brain causes neurogenesis, and so you're rebuilding neural pathways and creating new brain cells for so that to slow mental degradation. Also, it helps with a lot of other issues like anxiety, depression, concerns with end of life, existential dread. There's lots of things that microdosing can help with. Now, there's also a whole slew of studies showing that microdosing can help rewire the central nervous system. But honestly, this isn't getting the same amount of attention yet. And to a certain degree, that's the media's fault, and to a certain degree, people are not yet aware of these options, and so they're not being facilitated enough. And we have to remember, it's still a Schedule 1, even though availability has spiked. It is still, you still can get in trouble for holding on to it. And then, of course, there are the people who are taking, what we call museum doses at, like maybe a gram, and that's just mostly often for quality of life, to increase the quality of the day at the beach, or the time with your family, or making love, or whatever, right? It's just like a quality of life increase. And then you get people who are taking large doses or heroic doses because there is something that is disjointed that they want to smooth out. They want to go through some sort of ego death, or commune with the all, or speak to God. All of these are different life-enhancing ways that people are using mushrooms that we're just coming to the point of comfort to even be talking about. As far as the dangers, the primary danger is taking too much under the wrong set and setting, and yourself having an experience that is negative, either through paranoia or fear, or you go and you do something stupid like call paramedics, or decide you're going to take off your clothes and run downtown. I mean, like these are it's not the kind of danger where if you take too many you are likely to die, or it's addictive or anything like that. It's mostly you having a misunderstanding of the world around you and then doing something that ends up on Instagram.
I wanted to add, I'm actually an addiction neuroscientist, and some of the research out there actually shows that taking more than microdoses of psilocybin mushrooms is very effective at reducing consumption of cigarettes. And so, about 50% less cigarettes smoked, actually, when you use these are older studies too. It's very interesting. It's like there's a lot of newer research, on microdosing, but there's other studies out there that really did show that this was effective for reducing a lot of different addictive activities. And so, when you look at public health, right, one of the biggest public health issues is nicotine and smoking. And so if we could get people to stop smoking, that would be a huge thing. So we really should be rolling out psilocybin. And it's interesting because the people that we, first talked to in forming Decriminalize Denver and some of the other decriminalized nature groups across the country, a lot of the motivation for these people forming these groups was, hey, I used psilocybin mushrooms to quit smoking. So this was something that we see in studies, but this is something that we also see anecdotally over and over and over again. So when I see somebody that is actually struggling with quitting tobacco, that's one of the first things that I try to recommend. Try microdosing. If microdosing doesn't work, try a bigger dose. Try to work with someone, and a lot of times it's actually very, very successful. So that's my 2 cents there.
what causes a bad trip? My brother-in-law took mushrooms, and he just had this really bad trip where he got down on himself and felt like he was a POS and just a terrible individual, and had all these like really negative thoughts, and it just really brought him down, and it was a bad trip. A bad trip might be hallucinations or uncontrollable paranoia or reckless behavior. Why ultimately do people have bad trips?
I think that there's really no bad trips. There's bad experiences that you didn't integrate properly, right? I really hope that everyone has a lesson from these things. Of course, there can be unsafe experiences, right? If, for example, if you're on a medication that maybe is not safe for you to take psychedelics with, and then you have a really, really bad, experience, right, with racing heart and paranoia and things like that, that's a whole nother class of bad experiences and bad trips. But if you're having an uncomfortable experience because, say, unresolved trauma is coming up, right? Sometimes that's actually the purpose of taking psychedelics, right? You want to actually work through some traumas. It's not all unicorns and rainbows. Okay, I'm going to see, melting, walls and hallucinations and things like that. It's going to be beautiful, amazing. I'm going to write in my journal afterwards and everything, and it's going to just be enlightenment and I'm Buddha. Like, that's not how that works. Sometimes you have to go through some things and it's uncomfortable. And a lot of people sometimes aren't expecting that. They're not sure what to do with that. And so, again, it's all about set and setting. Part of this is, knowing, what the proper dose is, knowing how to take psychedelics if you're unfamiliar with it, or you're taking a dose that's larger, or you are going through something, to have somebody, sit with you and make sure you're okay, and to take care of you and things like that, so that you can go through a better experience. It's always important, if you do have a weird or, again, bad trip, right, to know what was different about that experience, especially if you're a more experienced person, right? Did you take something else with that? What was going on that was a little bit different? And usually you can pinpoint something was off, or maybe, again, there was a lesson for you to learn and you need to integrate that afterwards. Usually there's something that you can pinpoint. And then, of course, there's always, the possibility that maybe the substance that you were using was adulterated in some way as well. We have to remember that psychedelics, of course, are not pure pharmaceuticals and things like that. So there's a lot of things that can play into, a bad trip. Shango, I don't know if you want to contribute.
Sure. I agree with everything Dr. Ross said, but I will break out two parts, the set and setting part, because we often use this term set and setting, and I've realized from talking with patients that not everyone necessarily knows what that means. And set is your mindset. And so a lot of people, they just think, oh, I'm going to do psychedelics casually. And except for microdosing, that's like really not the case. You are taking a trip. And just like if you were to take a vacation, you would prepare and pack appropriately. And so you want to make sure you have a mindset where if you are already in a crappy mood, psychedelics usually just expand the mood that you are presently in. And so you don't necessarily take mushrooms to make your mood better. You try to get yourself in a, as good of a headspace as you can be. Because, like, I know some people are dealing with trauma, so they're not necessarily going to be happy, but be in the best, one of the better mood states that you can be, and then take the psychedelics, because that mindset will really set the tone for your experience. And then you're setting the location and who you're going to be with, is very important as well. If you're kind of like an outdoor nature person, don't be taking your psychedelics and then being inside with a room full of people with a loud television and everybody else is drinking, right? You're setting yourself up for these bad experiences. And so first, making sure your head's in the right place, and then making sure you've kind of planned out your trip. You make sure that you know where you're going to be. You're going to make sure you've got your favorite snacks, make sure you've got a lot of water, and then open yourself to the experience. One other thing I want to point out is, mushrooms have been done without therapeutic or counselor care for forever. But, if you're somebody who suffers from serious depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things of this nature. I would definitely consider, at the very least, discussing your mindset with your care provider first, and perhaps have such a person present for it. Because if you already have a questionable relationship with consensus reality, a proper dose could cause that fissure to become even greater.
And I would also add too that everyone, before they go on a psychedelic trip, should have the Fireside hotline like on their phone. So there's a free number that you can call. And you wouldn't remember to call them if you didn't already have it on your phone. So like do that, put that number in before you go on your trip. And in case you have something come up and you're panicking, you're by yourself, or you just need to talk to somebody, they have people that you can talk to or text. Most of the time, I don't think it's 24/7 yet. Hopefully with funding, they will be, but it's a wonderful nonprofit service. And it's just amazing to be able to contact someone. Hopefully with the psychedelic renaissance, those services will just keep on expanding, but to have a trained person that is there without judgment to help you integrate that process, or to be able to just tell you, like, you're not going to die, like whatever you're going through is okay. I've gone through it too. It is okay. You are alive. You are not dying. It is okay. Like that's all sometimes you need if you're going through a really bad trip. But if you're going through a bad trip and you're by yourself, it is scary. So free hotlines exist to help you. So put those in your phone before you go on a trip.
We talk a lot about in the cannabis industry, if you're going to eat an edible, wait a while. The worst thing is to overconsume and then have the heart palpitations and the thoughts of panic and you're going to die or whatever. What is the moderate dose? Because I was looking online doing some research for this panel, and I saw that they put a moderate dose of like between 1 and 3.5 grams. But when I did 3.5 grams, like that was a huge dose. I got into an argument with a poster. I don't know if you guys remember Red Dog, a beer poster, but my college roommate had a poster, and I got into an argument with the dog and the poster from 3.5 grams. And they're trying to tell me that's a moderate dose. I don't think that's a party dose. Can you guys like explain what a moderate dose should be?
Sure. So there's a pretty common scale. And if people really want to go in depth into this, they can check out the recent episode of Shaping Fire, where I interviewed Dr. Miyabi Shields, and we talk about how the chemical brain functioning impacts when you do a heroic dose all the way down to a microdose. So generally, it is a microdose is going to be 0.1 of a gram. A museum dose, or something that you might enjoy an activity around other people, I would consider a moderate dose, would be 1 gram. And then from 1 gram up to 3.5 grams, really more like your 2 to 3.5 grams, would be what people would consider taking a trip, right? Doing my mushrooms. But then there is over 3.5, which people will either call a heroic dose or an ego death dose. Anything after 3 grams is getting very serious, right? You're going to be high for a while, and your relationship with consensus reality will definitely shift. And so, know that, as soon as you get above 2, you're, things are getting more than moderate.
I would like to add, though, that everyone's experience is a little bit different due to their brain chemistry. And we have to realize that most Americans are on some kind of medication. Now, for women, they're on birth control. Now, many people are on mental health medications, and people are looking for, magic mushrooms to help with their depression or anxiety. So a lot of people are already on antidepressants, right? And they're not going to just quit their antidepressants cold turkey. Of course, that's not safe to begin with, but they're not really tapering down their dose to go on, say, a recreational dose of mushrooms for one day, right? And so a lot of antidepressants actually blunt your response to psilocybin mushrooms. So some of the dose ranges that you're talking about, somebody who's already on psilocybin mushrooms, some people might have a slightly, more sensitive response to mushrooms, but most people will have a blunted response. So they might have to take slightly more mushrooms to have the same response. So it's interesting. There is a slight deviation in range. And again, it really depends on how your brain chemistry is, what your medications are on, your weight, et cetera, whether you're drinking alcohol or not, how much sleep you've gotten, what other supplements you're on. There's some supplements that you can take that will either boost the serotonin in your system or not, like 5-HTP, et cetera. So there's all sorts of little things, little variables that can affect how your experience of psilocybin mushrooms goes.
Yeah, you mentioned alcohol, and Shango mentioned alcohol at the beginning. And Shango, you live down the street from your buddy, Dr. Ethan Russo, and he coined entourage effect. So I'm curious about the entourage effect in magic mushrooms. So the entourage effect suggests that there's the sum of contributing parts of a botanical or biological process that produces a greater synergistic effect in comparison to the effects of each individual part when presented alone. Does the entourage effect hold true for mushrooms?
Well, the first answer is we don't really know yet because the research has not been allowed for so long. We are still learning what all the components and metabolites that are present in mushrooms that might be active. Now, last week on Shaping Fire, we interviewed a mushroom analytics lab operator, and he spoke at length about the different analytes other than psilocybin that may be playing a role in our experiences. But we continually ran up against walls of science that does not exist yet. For example, those of us who are all familiar with cannabis and cannabis dosing knows that the terpene profile is exceptionally important, especially for consumers that are only looking at THC, right? Terpenes play a huge role in sculpting the variety of the experience. Well, mushrooms have terpenes as well, and we're only now starting to begin to look into those terpenes, what they might be and what their effects might be, and what's the secondary metabolites in psilocybe mushrooms that could be influencing things. Mostly we focus on psilocybin because it converts to psilocin in the body, and that's actually the hallucinogen. So I would say that we do not have firm evidence of an entourage effect like we do for cannabinoids in mushrooms yet, but that research is going on, and many folks expect that we're going to start finding secondary metabolites that are not psilocybin, which are adding to either the central nervous system healing experience or just the psychedelic experience itself.
I mean, the fact that you have synthetic psilocybin, right, and it has a different effect than, say, a full spectrum, mushroom, is evidence that there probably is an entourage effect. Then you also have the fact that there's, multiple if not hundreds of psilocybin, species out there, right? And they all have different, they do have different amounts of psilocybin in them, but they also have different amounts of these other, like baeocystin and other compounds in them. So they do have different effects from how long, the high is, how intense the high is, et cetera, right? So for example, if you go to Amsterdam, there's all different types of mushrooms you can take, and they can sort of quantify what kind of effect you're going to have if you can go and take them, right? So we sort of can tell, hey, there are differences in mushrooms if you take them. So I do think that there is an entourage effect. Yes, we do need to quantify that similar to how we have in cannabis, but there's definitely something going on.
Shango, you mentioned earlier on that psilocybin rewires the brain, and you also mentioned that there's no studies that have been that have evaluated the long-term effects of repeated use of magic mushrooms. And so I kind of want to bring that question back up about long-term effects of magic mushrooms. They've been used in therapeutic settings to treat a variety of ailments and disorders, including cluster headaches, obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, addiction, and a recent resurgence in the research into the therapeutic effects showing promising results. But what's it going to take to enter mainstream psychiatry?
Well, legality, that's for sure. And you know, in the municipalities where mushrooms are have been blessed, you know, Portland, Berkeley, Colorado, you know, you're starting to see programs exist where there are now certified and licensed, well, probably not licensed yet, but at least certified and trained facilitators who are working with patients. But as far as the long-term impacts, I would say two things. Number one, I mean, it is a natural medicine that people take for longish periods, and historically, anecdotally, we don't see problems. But the very nature of mushrooms is not really designed for long-term use, right? The idea is that you want to cycle onto the mushrooms, take them for a particular period of time, and then take a break and see how you're doing. Because unlike, let's say that if you are a pain patient and you're using cannabis because you don't want to use an opioid, right? You can often, if you're a chronic patient and you're going to be in pain the rest of your life, you'll probably be using cannabis the rest of your life. And we understand that. But that's not really how it is with mushrooms. If you are depressed and you are going to microdose and also you know, do your therapy and make some life changes, and then in 3 months after you're done with a 3-month protocol, you know, it's usually recommended that you get off it for a while and see how you're doing. And similarly, you know, you're also not going to be taking, you know, large doses every day. Not only will that get exhausting, but you know, that's not the mode of use for this medicine. And so I would say that while those studies for long-term use are still being done, it is also not the nature of the drug.
And Dr. Ross, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I mean, when you compare mushrooms to typical antidepressants, right? I would say that psychiatrists and therapists are looking for things like safety, right? And one of the biggest safety concerns they have is the issues that patients have withdrawing off of antidepressants. In fact, a lot of patients don't see any efficacy after being on antidepressants for years, but they have such issues in side effects trying to withdraw from these antidepressants that they're stuck on them. They can't taper off of them. They're literally just taking them because it is so horrific to get off of these antidepressants. So for a therapist or psychiatrist, even if a patient had to be on mushrooms long-term, you know, if there were no side effects to that, that would be less risky than having them be on pharmaceuticals. Now, the fact that they could be on them and be able to get off them with no side effects and no harms, and then be able to go back on them without any real issues is actually very, very safe and very, very beneficial. So I think it's, again, like the risk and benefit analysis for any therapist it's really going to be a very, very exciting thing once this is all legalized. Again, you know, I don't think that we're going to have the natural forms of some of these substances in the offices. We're going to see synthetics, unfortunately, because pharmaceuticals are what we see. They might not be as safe as what we're saying, you know, with the substances that are being microdosed, but they're probably going to be a safer form than what, you know, the antidepressants and other medications that people are currently using. So again, safer is better. And that's really what all it comes down to for doctors.
I feel like we could carry this conversation longer, but y'all got a vacation to go to or whatever. It's sunny in Seattle. Shango, you got something to do, I know. So we're going to roll this one up. So I want to thank my guest, Shango Loss. He is with the founder and host of Shaping Fire. You can find Shaping Fire on YouTube and probably a bunch of other places.
Anywhere you download your podcasts.
That's it. And then Dr. Michele Ross, she's the founder of Infused Health. Is it Infused Health?
It's drmichelleross.com.
Damn, there you go. All right. So with that, we're going to roll this one up. We're going to be back and just after the commercial break with another panel. So I want to thank both Shango and Dr. Ross. Appreciate you guys being with us. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, Josh.
Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. This edition of Green Rush Live is supported by Canna Business Resources, helping you grow with Canna Business funding. Check them out at cannabusinessresources.com. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information.
You would think that it is. However, there's quite a bit of debate right now in the accounting industry when it relates to cannabis with this exact question. I'm part of a few different networking groups that are solely accountants for cannabis companies. And there's been quite a bit of back and forth in those communities and discussion regarding whether 280E, if it went away, if the administration legalized cannabis or took it off of Schedule 1, what would happen? And it could go either way right now. The debate is it can make the accountant's life much easier. That's what a lot of the inexperienced accountants are saying right now, it seems, whereas the accountants that have been in this industry for a while and have gone through the same thing that happened with hemp a few years ago are saying that will make lives more difficult, because when hemp became declassified a while back, the accounting became more complicated.
Welcome back to the Green Rush, the business of cannabis, where we're talking about everything that is psychedelics today on the show. With me on this segment is Robert Laurie, founder of Lucem Law up in BC, British Columbia, Canada. Rob, thanks for being with us.
Hey, Josh, good to be with you again.
Yeah, good to see you. So we're just going to jump right in here. Wanted to ask you about the first time you used psilocybin, and if you use it now, why?
All right, let's break that down. The first time I used psilocybin and why?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it probably goes back at least 25 years ago plus. some buddies said, hey, let's do some mushrooms. And a few of them had done it before, and it was anything but a medical setting. And it was a pretty good night. I mean, I'll never be able to watch Caddyshack and Fantasia ever the same way ever again. But definitely that was a first step into a much broader universe, if you will. I mean, the why probably goes back to junior high school with regards to reading some pretty interesting books. And they just happened to be on the St. George's summer reading list in grade 11. And there were some books, including Aldous Huxley's The Doors of Perception, and then Brave New World. And what else did we look at? But there was a heavy bent on psychedelics, for example, and certainly in Doors of Perception and Brave New World. And in fact, when I met Dennis McKenna the first time, and we've become, I'd say, pretty close friends ever since, he told me you can't totally understand Huxley unless you read The Island in addition to Brave New World, because kind of between those two extremes is what Huxley was getting at. So in a nutshell, yeah, it was those books that, reading Doors of Perception and thinking, my goodness, we only use one part of the brain and one part of perception, and there's all these other dimensions, was an interesting setup for psychedelics. And since then, my involvement has been a little more serious than Caddyshack and Fantasia.
A lot's happened, with cannabis, and then now on the coattails of cannabis, you've got the psychedelic industry. What's one of the most interesting trends you've seen in the space?
Well, I don't know if it's really a trend, more of you already have a framework, right? And so you mentioned cannabis, and in Canada, the first Section 56 exemption for medical access happened in 2001. It was the RV Parker case. And so that kind of set the framework for the first case in what John Conroy QC calls the litany of litigation. And so 15 years later, coupled with Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party's electoral platform to legalize, election platform, and promise to legalize cannabis, coupled with two pretty significant court cases. There was the Allard case and Owen Smith to do with edibles and cannabis in all its forms. So really that 15 years took us from medical access to cannabis right through to a recreational, you can buy it in a store, consume it, legal, no repercussions for cannabis. But if we compare where we are now with psychedelics, maybe we're back where we were in 2001 with cannabis, maybe 2002. I say that because in August 2020, that was, August 4th. So over 2 years ago, TheraSil was responsible for achieving the first Section 56 exemption for psilocybin, or access to psilocybin for therapeutic purposes. And we've had some advancements since then. I mean, there's been a number of folks have gained admission or access to therapy. It's still very strict and tightly regulated, and you and I probably wouldn't be eligible given our situations or conditions are not extreme enough to say that we have any to be eligible. So where the trend really is psychedelics are in an interesting holding pattern, right? I don't think they're going to be legalized like cannabis has anytime soon for anything that resembles recreational purposes. Like, think about it, Josh, we're hardly going to meet up next year and be able to legally walk into a store and buy psychedelics. Now, you can illegally in Vancouver. That's a separate conversation. But I think to cut to the chase here, the rules are already really written for psychedelics because they are going to be treated very much like a pharmaceutical. And so we already have the pharmaceutical avenues for research, scientific endeavors, plus the fact that let's take mescaline, MDMA, LSD, synthetic synthesized psilocybin. I mean, all of these things are already in the public domain. So that then leaves drug development, and drug development has always been there. So where are we and what are the trends? Well, I think the trend is that psychedelics is running out of room to maneuver. More people are realizing like, hey, this isn't quite like the next cannabis. Different frameworks, different pathworks to legalization. And due to the fact that anyone that's doing any serious work is advocating at the diametric opposite end of the axis scale from anything that looks like irresponsible, non-medical, done in a clinical setting environment. So those are the trends. And I think the US is certainly leading some of the efforts, certainly in Denver and with Oregon's therapeutic initiative. So from where I sit, I think it's interesting because these initial models are kind of like the canaries on the coal mine, if that makes sense. Happy to share more on that point.
I'm curious. So I was going to make an analogy to the cannabis industry, but you said it's going to be more akin to the pharmaceutical industry. So if it does follow the pharmaceutical industry, what are some of the challenges that psilocybin companies are going to face, like regulation and crop insurance and supply chain?
Well, hold on. The problem for anybody in this space, and let's just even include cannabis back into the mix, like, great, you've got state level legalizations, right? Canadians will tell you what a pain in the ass it is to go down to the States and try to buy weed, because unlike at home, where it is legal and you can use a credit card, and certain legal outlets have been able to transition over onto legal and international banking frameworks. No, it's hard. Even legal companies are finding it difficult to get signed up with banks and insurance, and that's cannabis, right? Psychedelics, on the other hand, because of the fact that the three main international conventions still exist, that means just like cannabis, we're still limited traditionally to scientific and research purposes, medical access and scientific research. Cannabis, Canada being the first G7 country, again, think of us like Canada, like one big state. Sure, we've got 10 provinces and 3 territories, but because we're federally legal, it's kind of like Canada's one big state, if you will. However, there's nothing from Canada getting shipped across the border. It's not like you can buy legal Canadian rec weed at a legal Washington state recreational store, because technically and on the books, it's still illegal under international law. So think of it, that's the big wall that these planes, which are like psychedelic companies, which are literally like airplanes, they're just flying into these walls, and these walls haven't changed. They've, in the case of psychedelics, been around since 1971, 1972. So until the deck is unstacked, and that really is where we're at with controlled drugs and substances legislation, which was largely brought in by the Nixon administration and has been championed internationally by the US federal government. Until those laws are changed, it's very limited, the legal applications and instances where psychedelics, even for therapeutic purposes, will be legal. And so that rollout and what that ultimately looks like, where it's then recognized by the US federal authorities as a legal going concern, I mean, that'll be interesting. Canada's a little further ahead on some of those fronts, where they've granted access to, I think, about 63 folks under the Section 56. And again, that's a ministerial exemption. So the Minister of Health technically can say, okay, that person's so sick and ill, and the need and the requirement is there, they can grant an exemption to the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act for that individual and their physician to possess psilocybin. And that's just it. Where are they getting it from, right? There's been recently a few companies that have popped up that are providing legal, naturally grown psilocybin mushrooms, if you will. But there's also labs who've got licenses to provide, EUP, EU GMP grade synthetic psilocybin. So again, the abilities and the access points are there, but for the masses to be able to actually get into these therapies and clinics, there's a lot of challenges, like cost. I'm hearing rumblings that some of these psilocybin treatments are as high as $7,000, which is nuts, right? Certain corporate insurance plans will cover the cost, but because it's at a very new, I don't call experimental stage, but it's at its infancy, these costs are quite high still. Even for ketamine therapy, vets, I know a lot of vets who've been getting access to ketamine, and anywhere from $6,000 to $3,000 is a lot of money. Mm-hmm. Where you're hearing people doing it in unregulated, the black market for like $500 to $1,500. So it's not a question of access and availability. All of these things have been there. The real challenge is, how are companies going to be able to get privileges or first mover advantage to do something that pharmaceutical companies technically could be doing, and I suspect some have been doing since the 70s, but really, other than drug development or trying to patent and enforce your patents on a therapy protocol, most of these things already exist. So caveat emptor, buyer beware, I'd say, in the psychedelic space, because I think to compare it to cannabis is correct in some regards, but as indicated, not quite there in others. Does that make sense? Does that agree, or am I coming at you completely out of left field here?
No, I think that makes sense. From the standpoint of cannabis, we've been all talking about, you talked about EU GMP certification, and we talk about grass generally recognized as safe. What are you seeing or hearing that's being done to increase the quality of the products and making them recognized industry-wide as quality, stable, safe, and working on a grass designation?
Well, it's a good question, because, usually these things are a bit of a work in progress. Now, Canada has fairly comprehensive and a very strict framework. The people that were behind drafting the Cannabis Act, and this is something I think the US is going to learn the hard way, they drafted this with product liability litigation in mind. Just look at how litigious the US is by comparison. People burn their mouths on a coffee in McDonald's and get $700 million or whatever. It's crazy. Canadian lawyers hear about what Florida lawyers pull in on personal injury, and it's like, man. So all that being said, it's going to be tough, because like cannabis, how do you differentiate your product? And in Canada, because these standards and regulations are almost more suitable for a pharmaceutical company than an agricultural business, it's done with regards to trying to avoid and mitigate masses of people suing. right? And so that's where you look at it and think, could I have done it better? Well, from a product liability litigation standpoint, no. And it's another reason how you can only buy prepackaged cannabis, which is already pre-sealed, pre-packaged, because it then avoids, breaks in the chain of causation between interfering and tampering between the ultimate consumer getting it and it leaving the producer's, yard.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're going to be standards, but do the standards in the US, are they as high? Arguably no, from what I've heard when it comes to issues like mildew or pesticide use or, acceptable thresholds of unsafe. And I mean, all of those things are going to have to unify, because again, you seem to have variable standards, certainly between Washington State versus Oklahoma or California versus Oregon, for example. They all seem to have this patch quilt of different standards and different models, and how that all plays out, we'll see.
This is a part where I ask you to pull out your crystal ball for some predictions, and looking at synthetic versus natural. The question is, how do you produce enough product without compromising quality? Is natural better than synthetic? And which method is the most cost effective? I mean, I think synthetic is the most cost effective, and that's probably what we're going to end up seeing, but I want to get your take.
It's a very multifaceted issue, because the other dynamic that is in there that a lot of people don't really talk about when it comes to psychedelics is conservation. With conservation, I mean, you've got peyote cacti species that are threatened of being wiped out through over harvesting. And as Dennis McKenna says, if everybody goes to the jungle, what's going to happen to the jungle, right? And that's effectively, you're seeing that because psychedelics are so popular, there's a huge demand for rare sacred herbs and plant and other fungi. And so that the bigger issue is, well, what are we doing to ensure that, we don't consume and wipe out the lineage of these plants and fungi? And so as to if one's better than the other, I mean, I think from a therapeutic point of view, they can achieve both the same thing. But when you talk to people that have been trained in a lineage of shamanistic plant medicine, there definitely is a spirit in the plant which is said to have been lost in the synthetic lab produced forms. Cost, well, there's no question that a lab produced synthetic will be cheaper on a number of fronts, and plus you're going to have minimal batch variation and less likely of contaminated bad batches and so on. So really, I think, we need to have a system that allows for different modes of access depending on what is the purpose and the intention and the ultimate goal. Because one size fits all when it comes to psycho-spiritual therapy with a psychedelic component. I think there's going to need to be multiple avenues.
Mm-hmm.
My crystal ball is we're going to get nowhere too fast. And when we get there, we're going to have to pick up the pace.
Yeah.
Because look, none of this is new. It's just new to you, is what I tell most people. Mm-hmm. And trying to take something that existed off grid, that was on grid before, and now fit it into Western medicine and accepted psychiatric practice, man, this is where worlds collide. So yeah, it's going to be fun. I think it'll be great for the lawyers. Insurance companies will have their work cut out for them. And ultimately, this is going to be a good thing, because it'll mean hopefully more people who are struggling with depression and other ailments will be able to get the help they need. Because nothing's worse than, being able to see avenues of change without being able to access those avenues of change.
U.S. military suicides are at the highest they've been in 80 years, and 22 per day or 22 per minute, whatever it was 22 too many that were dying. And this could help definitely. So if people are interested, whether in the U.S. or Canada, and they want to get a hold of you at Ad Lucem Law and talk to you about cannabis or magic mushrooms, the psychedelic industry, how can they get a hold of you, Rob?
Yeah, my battery's just about to die here.
Perfect timing.
Holiday. So you can reach me, direct number 604-218-1084, and my email, you can reach me at rob@adlucemlaw.com. Just Google Robert Laurie, Laurie, Ad Lucem Law, that's ADLUCEM. Ad Lucem means to or toward the light in Latin. New website up, so you should be able to find me, no problem. Thanks
Cool.
for having me, Josh. Good
You're
to be
welcome. We're going to go towards the light, meaning we're going to get out of here. It's the weekend. Appreciate it, Rob. Everybody else, have a great weekend. We're out of here. That's it. See you next Friday.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, the sentence is in. Brittany Griner gets 9 years in a Russian prison for possessing cannabis vape cartridges. Now, she's not the only pro athlete in trouble with the law. NBA journeyman Iman Shumpert gets busted at the Dallas airport for carrying over 6 ounces of weed through security. And President Biden's daughter-in-law visits a legal dispensary in California and draws more ire for her famous father-in-law in the White House. And Massachusetts gets its first changes to the cannabis law and the industry applauds. Plus, check out Forbes magazine this month. Berner, the founder of Cookie's dispensary franchise, becomes the first CEO in cannabis to make it to that cover. Cannabis news from coast to coast on We Talk News with Elena Pinto. Next.
Cannabis Media original content is supported by Revolutionary Clinics, Massachusetts #1 medical dispensary where the patient comes first, and by Accounting Buds, CPA services for the cannabis industry, and by stylighting.shop. Log on today to get your grow kit.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media, and welcome to Weed Talk News. Our top story this week is an unfortunate one, as WNBA star Brittany Griner has been sentenced by a Russian court to 9 years of jail time and a huge fine on top of that for a charge of drug smuggling. Griner was arrested with less than 1 gram of cannabis oil in her luggage at a Moscow airport back in February. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has condemned the sentencing, and Griner's defense team has assured they'll appeal.
President Biden saying today, American citizen Brittany Griner received a prison sentence that is one more reminder of what the world already knew. Russia is wrongfully detaining Brittany Griner. It's unacceptable, and I'll call on Russia to release her immediately so she can be with her wife, loved ones, friends, and teammates. My administration will continue to work tirelessly and pursue every possible avenue to bring Brittany and Paul Whelan home safely as soon as possible. And of course, we'll be waiting to watch how those negotiations to get her home ultimately follow after today's sentence.
Ironic timing for Griner's sentencing as another basketball star finds themselves in trouble stateside. A police report out of Texas shows former NBA player Iman Shumpert was arrested at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport last weekend for allegedly trying to bring 6 ounces of cannabis through security. Shumpert was arrested for felony possession of marijuana and taken to the airport jail, but no word yet on what further consequences he will face. And meanwhile, at the White House, President Biden is receiving some criticism over some family affairs. Melissa Cohen, who is married to Hunter Biden, was recently spotted dropping by a cannabis dispensary in Malibu after running errands with a Secret Service agent in tow. These images have caused many to throw up their arms, saying the president should do something about people who are incarcerated for cannabis, since his own daughter-in-law is apparently enjoying the fruits of the legal industry. But some criticize that stance, saying that the individual president can't be held responsible for something that Congress needs to step in and do, just because his own family is using cannabis too. An interesting position for the Biden family, and hopefully the conversation about cannabis at the White House only continues. So now let's kick off our state-to-state roundup with Josh Kincaid in Washington State, where regulators there are now looking to update social equity rules in the industry.
I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge with the Washington State Cannabis Report for We Talk News. There's 6 key metrics that'll provide you with a pulse check on the Washington regulated cannabis market. By comparing retail sales across today's regulated cannabis markets, we can better understand which types of products consumers are buying in Washington. Monthly sales, for example, have consistently dropped between 7 to 14% each month year to date. Washington had 106 million in total cannabis sales last month. Although having been declining monthly since August 2021, the Washington market remains resilient with approximately 3.3 million transactions average per month and an average spending per store visit at over $32, with consumers having the choice of nearly 1,750 products or SKUs to choose from. And maybe in Washington, there's too many choices. And that's how a $20 eighth of cheetah piss recently became the 8th best-selling cannabis flower in Washington. I don't know. But next week, you're going to find out more about Washington State's cannabis scene. But with that, we're going to have to roll up this Washington State Cannabis Report. I'm Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge, reporting for We Talk News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.
A group of lawmakers in New Jersey are riding high on the coattails of some recent cannabis research. According to the study conducted by the Lancet Psychiatry, researchers found people with cannabis-related psychosis are much more likely to have been using products containing high levels of THC, with an increased likelihood of addiction. Because cannabis in New Jersey is legal, legislators from the state's 10th district claim minors now have easier access to a, quote, harmful substance, and that there will be greater need for law enforcement. All of this while neglecting to note that studying cannabis is still illegal under Schedule 1, and we haven't seen any other studies to back this up yet. Now, here's Jill Goldsberry with more from New Jersey this week.
Hi guys, welcome. I'm Jill Goldsberry with the news in New Jersey. Well, New Jersey is getting its 18th recreational dispensary shop this weekend. Verano Zen Leaf in Neptune Township has opened up officially on Route 66 this Friday and will become, like I said, New Jersey's 18th store offering adult legalized marijuana. The store will offer free food and giveaways and free gifts to customers during the ribbon cutting ceremony, which happened this morning at 7:30 a.m. And in other news, it seems that our Garden State is adding another layer of difficulty for cannabis entrepreneurs starting a business, particularly for minority business owners. This hurts most. It's been over a year now since the state has legalized the plant, and just a few months since it's been legal for recreational use. Observers are saying of the 300 plus licenses awarded so far, as many as 50% have had to give up their licenses because commercial landlords are charging upwards of $10,000 for spaces that normally would cost a few $1,000s. So securing a space is the next step once you get a license. And if you don't have the license, if you don't have a license, you may have to give up. If you have a license and you don't have a secured space, you may have to give up your license. According to a report on Fox News, Blaze Law Firm's attorney Chirali Patel stated that real estate properties are asking a minimum of $10K and above for the same property. And once they hear it's a cannabis business. So, according to the CRC, this is something that will be looked into. And now that we're talking a minimum of $10,000 and above for the same property, because as soon as the landlord hears it's cannabis, that's the problem.
Another state looking to jump on the growing trend of adult use cannabis is Pennsylvania. In fact, lawmakers there have finally introduced a bill proposing adult use sales in the state. Claudia Post takes a closer look in this week's Pennsylvania report.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for We Talk News. First up, the Laughlin Street bipartisan adult use marijuana legislation bill prioritizes safety, social, and economic equity and engages Pennsylvania's agricultural industry. Hallelujah, everybody. Great news. We have an adult use bill here in Pennsylvania. So that's what the bill is going to speak to. And this is monumental for Pennsylvania because, as you know, we're surrounded by everybody else who's got adult use, and people can just zip over and get their goodies in a different state, and we're losing tax revenue. So this proposal ensures the vitality of Pennsylvania's world-class medical marijuana industry. I don't know, that's a stretch, while creating thousands of jobs and generating hundreds of millions of dollars in new tax revenue for the Commonwealth. What are we waiting for in Pennsylvania? Now, this is an absolutely absurd piece of information, but I'm going to share it with you. Medical experts, now I'm not sure who these medical experts are, but Pennsylvania's homegrown marijuana bill is the most unscientific and irresponsible piece of legislation they have ever seen. The bill allows any medical patient with 30 days of residency in Pennsylvania to grow up to 6 cannabis plants for personal use. Now, isn't that what everybody else is doing? I don't know about the 30 days residency, but I do know that many states have home grow, and it is an issue, and I don't know why they're stopping it, but as usual, it's Pennsylvania. They favor the decriminalization, God, that was tough to say, of marijuana and the use of medical marijuana, but residential marijuana growth and increased marijuana availability will bring trouble to the government because they can't control it. 6 plants, people. What's that? This is a sad story. Mark Vogel, a Pennsylvania school teacher, was sentenced to 14 years in Russia, from Russia's prisons, for having medical marijuana in his luggage. And the other woman who I forgot her name right away, but she also got sentenced today, 9 years. She got 9 years. When news broke that the U.S. government was working on a deal to bring home Americans detained in Russia, the family and representatives had hoped Google would be on that list, and they were devastated to learn otherwise. Now, of course, the family is begging Biden to add him to that list. Such a shame. All this politicizing of everything. Anyway, that's a wrap from Pennsylvania. I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From We Talk News, have a fabulous week.
Adult use cannabis has been legal in Massachusetts for more than 5 years, but the industry is still in infancy in many ways. Well, this week, lawmakers approved significant changes to the state's booming industry, a move that has advocates and entrepreneurs rejoicing. We Talk News producer Tori Chamberlain breaks it all down in this week's Massachusetts report.
Hey guys, so Massachusetts lawmakers passed some major changes this week to the Bay State's cannabis laws. And that may sound a little scary, but it's actually looking like these are going to be good changes that the industry is welcoming with open arms. So what does it entail? First of all, the bill passed this week is going to crack down on those steep local fees that are charged to cannabis operators. This is going to be huge for small businesses. Many Massachusetts business owners say that they've dealt with a really difficult process to get approved at the municipal level. So this is going to cut down on how difficult that process is, open more doors for even more business owners. Additionally, there's simply not enough institutional financing right now to help certain applicants in the Bay State when they're looking to open a cannabis business. So this is just going to make the barrier to entry a lot easier, and it's going to prevent a corporate takeover of cannabis across this state. Also, the new legislation is going to direct 15% of the state's excise tax from recreational sales into a fund for disenfranchised cannabis entrepreneurs. So these are people that may be affected by the things we just mentioned: tough barriers to entry, overregulation or overtaxation. The state is now going to take 15% of all the money from the state excise tax and put that directly into a fund to help these entrepreneurs. So that's huge, especially for people of color who are looking to break into the industry. The bill is also going to make it easier to wipe cannabis convictions from someone's record. That's a good thing, right? And it's also going to greenlight a pilot program for cannabis cafes right here in Massachusetts, which is going to make the Bay State just the latest of a number of states that are looking to put cannabis lounges into their public spaces. So Governor Charlie Baker has signaled that he is going to sign this bill with all these changes to Massachusetts cannabis law. So hopefully we'll start to see the impacts of all of these tremendous changes. But for now, that's it from the Bay State this week. I'm Tori Chamberlain.
Bay State Cannabis Report is supported by Holyoke Cannabis, Holyoke's finest cannabis recreational experience.
It looks like the South could get a little greener. State election officials in Arkansas say a referendum to legalize recreational cannabis sales in the state has succeeded in submitting the necessary signatures to qualify the initiative for the November ballot. Meanwhile, voters in Missouri are looking to go beyond medical cannabis by adding adult use sales and consumption to their ballot. While the legislation has struggled to land its fair shot at a vote so far, a new study shows a strong majority of Missouri voters, including Republicans, support legalizing the plant for adult use. Brandon Jones has the details in this week's Missouri Report.
Hey everybody, it's Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven with the Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. And yes, it's getting very close to the August 9th deadline for all voting. The Secretary of State will close down to see if recreational will actually be passed here in the state of Missouri. Right now, we are seeing bipartisan support. It's about 70% Democrat support, about 50% Republican support, and basically 60% overall average support in Missouri for legalizing recreational use marijuana. So all cannabis should be hopefully legal here in Missouri by November, we hope, at least be on the ballot. But the deadline is August 9th. There has been over 400,000 signatures already for the Legal Mo 2022 initiative. Right now, they're kind of different sides saying we're missing some actual districts versus overall votes. So they're trying to get out in those two particular districts that are less than 1,500 votes short. So yes, we are seeing an overall want for recreational use here in the state of Missouri, but there is still just two districts that we're working on getting those signatures up. So if you're in those areas or not, please get out before August 9th because that is the deadline. Like I said, there are a couple of other initiatives, but the Legal Mo 22 has the most backing behind it and over 400,000 signatures. So again, please, let's try to get Missouri cannabis out here. Let's get everybody to have it recreational access. So let's please get out there, get your signatures done so we can get that August 9th deadline. Again, I'm Brandon Jones from Distribution Maven with Missouri Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News.
Green means go in the Green Mountain State. The Vermont Cannabis Control Board has officially begun accepting applications for business retail licenses a month earlier than originally planned. That's good news for an industry that's looking to begin sales come October. Jessie Lynn Dolan has more in this week's Vermont Report.
I'm Jessie Lynn Dolan from Nurse Grown Organics and Vermont Cannabis Nurses, and this is the Weed Talk News Vermont Report. Retail applications for the October 1st opening of retail sales have opened a month early and are now being accepted by the Cannabis Control Board. The Cannabis Control Board approved 20 more licenses this week and have officially hired their entire compliance team. They are working towards more inclusive language for product labeling mandates, suggesting use of human milk feeding and chest or breastfeeding as opposed to exclusionary breastfeeding only. Clean Green, the oldest and largest third-party certification for cannabis in the country, and Vermont Cannabis Nurses Association have teamed up to offer live, full-day bud tender and cannabis professional trainings in Vermont for the start of adult use sales. Sign up quick before they fill up. Stony Supper Club event series by Hot and Hetty commenced on August 6th with a cannabis-infused plant-based meal from Cocina Parata. featuring acclaimed canna chef Travis Limoges. That's the Vermont Report for Weed Talk News. I'm Vermont's cannabis nurse and ganjier, Jessie Lynn Dolan.
And finally, cannabis makes cover history. Berner, the CEO of the popular cookies brand, has landed the cover of Forbes magazine. The milestone makes him the very first cannabis CEO ever to have their face across the business magazine's front cover. In the issue, Berner discusses high taxes and strict regulations that have overburdened California's regulated cannabis market. And he also wrote online saying, quote, extremely humbled and blessed to be one of the faces for federal legalization in our country. Even more humbled to land the cover of Forbes magazine, which is the dream of some of the largest CEOs in the world. Is this just the beginning of cannabis executives taking over business spaces? With the way things are trending, we can only expect to see more faces of the industry in mainstream life. After all, it is a whole new world of weed out there, so use it wisely. And for now, that is it for Weed Talk News. I'm Elena Pinto for Pro Cannabis Media.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Hey, you want to grow your own plants? Check out Style Lighting's Grow Kit. It has everything you need to become an expert home grower and bring the power of the sun indoors. Style Lighting uses TCP's high-powered commercial LEDs that deliver twice the output in the market. The Grow Kit has a grow bag, a timer, chains to hang the light, and of course the best in the business lighting system by TCP. Check out stylelighting.shop for more information. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.